Hello everybody, it's Jay Roby. Today we're going to be looking at opposition in detail, and opposition is a very important technique to learn and to master, and hopefully for those of you who aren't too familiar with the concept will find this video useful, and for those of you who are, hopefully it'll be a good refresher. But basically, what is opposition? Well, the power of opposition is basically the ability to make inroads into the enemy position. And there's a couple rules that helps make this technique easier to remember. The first of which, well, actually we're going to look at a number of different forms of opposition. We're going to look at direct opposition, we'll look at diagonal opposition, and then we'll also look at opposition without a direct connection of the kings. So in other words, let's say the black king is over here and the white king is over here. There's no direct connection if they're not on a diagonal. There's still a rule that you can use that'll help you maintain the opposition. So the first one we're going to look at is direct opposition. In other words, the kings are directly facing each other on a file. Now, the rules for opposition are as follows. Whoever is to move with an odd number of squares in between the kings does not have opposition. Conversely, whoever is to move with an even number of squares in between the kings does have opposition. So let's take a look at the first one. We're going to play from white's perspective in this example. Now, if it's black to move, which it is in this example, black does not have opposition. Therefore, white will be able to make inroads into the black position. So if it's black to move, black has 5 options to move to, as you can see here. And none of these allow black to stop the white king from making inroads into its position. We're going to look at the very basic king to f5. Now, as you can see, the black king has moved backwards towards its side of the board, which allows white to encroach farther into the black position. And if black chooses to move to a diagonal square, white can simply get the opposition back by putting an odd number of squares in between the kings with black to move. So as you can see here, black really can't stop white from making its way up into the black side of the board. And that is direct opposition with an odd number of squares. Now I've taken off all the pieces on the board just to highlight the rule. We're going to look at some examples with a pawn later on, but that is direct opposition. So to summarize that one, we'll just flip back here. Whoever is to move with an odd number of squares in between the kings does not have the power of opposition. So what about diagonal opposition? Well, diagonal opposition follows the same rules. So in other words, if there's an odd number of squares, whoever is to move does not have the power of opposition. Consequently, whoever is to move that has an even number of squares between the kings does have the opposition. So in this example here, let's count the squares in between the kings. We have 4 squares in between the kings. If it's white to move, white will have the opposition. So let's take a look and see if that holds to be true. So white will move to c3, and the kings will continue to move to each other, and now you can see that after white moves to d4, it's black to move, but there's only 1 square in between the kings. And the rule states that if there's an odd number of squares between the kings, whoever is to move does not have the power of opposition. So in this position, black has to cede ground into its position to white. And white can continue to maintain that power of opposition and make inroads into black's camp. So now let's shuffle the pieces around and put an odd number of squares in between the kings on the diagonal. So now there's 5 squares in between the kings, and the rule states that whoever is to move with an odd number of squares in between the kings does not have opposition. So if it's white to move in this position, white will move along the diagonal and black will continue to do so, and now you'll see that there's only 1 square in between the kings and it's white to move. So that means that white no longer has the opposition and black can successfully keep white from encroaching on its position. So let's take a look now at the last form of opposition, which is opposition without any direct connection. So in other words, the kings aren't connected on a diagonal or a file. There is a rule that you can use to get the opposition, and it's called the magic box rule from Jeremy Selman. But basically the rule states that to gain the opposition in this position, if it was white to move, if white can create a square or a rectangle that has the kings on each of the kings on a corner of that square or rectangle that has the same color of chess squares, you will have the opposition. Now I know that sounds a little bit convoluted and complicated, but it's really quite simple. So for example, in this position, if white moves to d2, you'll notice that white has now created a rectangle that the kings are a part of. So for example, here's the rectangle here. and it goes all the way up and all the way down and connects the kings. More importantly, however, though, you'll notice that the corner squares of this rectangle are the same color, like in terms of the chess square, so they're all brown. So white has opposition in this position, and we can prove this by simply moving the kings to the side of the board. And as you can see here, white gets into a position where it's black to move, and there's only one square in between the kings. And as we know, the rule is if there's an odd number of squares between the kings, whosever turn it is to move does not have the opposition. Now, I know this last example is a little bit seems a little bit trickier than the other two, like especially direct and diagonal opposition, to learn. But it's if you play through it a couple times, you'll actually find out that it's quite simple. There's nothing really complicated about it. It's not rocket science or anything. So once you do get comfortable with it, even if it takes you several times to go over, it's definitely worth it. So just to summarize that one more time. To gain opposition when the kings are not directly connected, you want to create a square or a box, a square or a rectangle that has the four corner points of the same color. And I don't know if you caught it, but in this example, it came into being on a number of occasions. So for example, white gains the opposition here, and then again creates a rectangle that has the four corner points of the same color, and again does the same thing. And then as the kings come closer together, you'll notice that white continues to maintain the opposition by having those four corner points the same color. And in this position here, it's a square instead of a rectangle. Once again, the corner points are the same color, and white has the opposition. So that's opposition, the three forms. So we've covered direct opposition, diagonal opposition, and opposition without a direct connection. Now let's take a look at how this can play through when we have pieces on the board. Now, when there are other pieces on the board, I just want to state right away that the rules of opposition do not change. However, the utilization of those rules and the practical reality of the rules, there are some subtle things that you need to know. First, let's take a look at when we're trying to promote a pawn. Now, if it's black to move in this position, the rule states that whoever is to move with an odd number of squares in between the kings does not have opposition. So black does not have opposition in this position. Unfortunately for white, however, though, this is a complete draw. If black plays this solidly, there's no way that white is going to be able to promote this pawn, and I'm going to show you why. So let's say black moves to d5. Now this is the best move for black in this position because although black doesn't have opposition, white can't push the pawn because white's going to lose the pawn. So white has to move to either e3 or over to c3. And you can see here from this move that black can gain the opposition. And if black can gain the opposition, it's over for white. White will not be able to promote its pawn. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because of the YouTube limits, but let's just play through why this is the case. So the only move for white that actually changes the position, white could move back to d2, but it doesn't change the position. So the only move that white has really is to push the pawn at this point. And black can continue to basically maintain the opposition going down towards its back rank, and eventually white is going to be faced with a move that either stalemates black or loses its pawn. So it's definitely important to have your king in front of your pawn if you want to promote it. And the reason is that you can use your pawn to expend moves to either lose or gain opposition at critical junctures when you need it. So for example, let's take a look at this position. Black will move to d6. It doesn't really matter if black moved to c5 or e5 because white would still be able to make inroads into its position. So from here, white can seize the opposition again, forcing black off to the side and gaining more territory into the black position. And from here, white can expend pawn moves to gain and lose opposition when it needs to at critical junctures to further make inroads into the position and secure that queening square. Now, this is kind of a video all in and of itself, and I think I will make one soon about promotion of pawns. But for the opposition video that I'm covering today, I just want to point out that you want to make sure that you have your king in front of your pawn if you are trying to promote a pawn. Now there are some very subtle differences between trying to promote pawns. It's really a video in and of itself, which I'll probably make in the future. For example, it's a big difference when you're trying to promote a pawn from files B through G as opposed to the rook files. But today I just wanted to emphasize that when it comes to opposition, it really is important to have your king in front of your pawn. But the focus of this video is really about the three types of opposition: direct opposition, diagonal opposition, and opposition without a direct connection. So I hope you found the rules useful and the explanations useful, and take care, and we'll see you in the next video.